Good morning, colleagues. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you this morning at the launch of the Avon Teaching School Alliance's Flexible Working launch event. I'd like to start with a look at the bigger people picture. So I think our human resources function should not just be tactical, it should be strategic. So how do we create a culture in our organizations where all children and adults thrive? Schools and trusts are not just the buildings that we inhabit. Schools are the people, the relationships, and the way that people feel. Ensuring that there are enough high-quality teachers in England's schools is crucial for delivering a first-class education for children and young people. And attracting and retaining enough teachers is a key challenge facing schools and trust leaders today. So providing more opportunity for part-time and flexible working may provide part of the answer. Although a number of teachers are working part-time, and this has been rising since 2010, considerably fewer teachers work part-time compared to the average in the wider economy. So I'd like to honour this issue with evidence. I'll be talking through the National Foundation for Educational Research's 2019 research on part-time teaching and flexible working in our schools. NFER found that 36% of secondary teachers and leaders would ideally like to work part-time, compared to the 19% who currently do, so a difference of 17 percentage points. This NFER research investigated the demand for part-time and flexible working and the barriers for leaders and how these can be overcome. It comprised an analysis of the national data alongside survey questions and interviews with school leaders. So a number of important findings from this research. Part-time and flexible working is strongly influenced by the extent to which senior leaders take a proactive approach to encouraging different working patterns. This can include being systematic about asking for annual submissions to changing working patterns, checking these with timetables and timetablers, and staffing forecasts, and then negotiating further with staff, who also need to be flexible around their requests. So around 1 in 6 secondary school teachers, according to the research, would like to reduce their hours and could afford to do so. While it is unlikely that all of these teachers would actually reduce their hours if given the opportunity, the finding is consistent with NFER's previous research, which illustrated a significant number of teachers who actually leave the state sector, and they do so to take up part-time positions elsewhere. So the NFER research found that there are a series of worrying beliefs among our staff, which in fact may or may not be true, depending on the culture of the school or the trust in which they work. So firstly, staff not making a formal request because they suspect if they did, it would not be agreed or it would not be taken seriously. Secondly, staff feeling worried about the effect part-time working may have on their future career progression. And thirdly, a lack of potential job sharing partners in the department or in the school or in the trust. So why is this issue proved so intractable over time? The main barriers for school leaders are ensuring the continuity of education for pupils and timetabling, the constraints on flexible working patterns other than part-time working, some communication issues, and the additional costs often involved in allowing for sufficient time for planning. But there's some powerful reasons why we should look at how to overcome these barriers, and indeed how these barriers can be overcome. The benefits could be quite profound. So increased staff retention and recruitment, but particularly teacher retention and recruitment, improved staff well-being, so the ability to retain specialist expertise and curriculum breadth, and an opportunity to reduce staff costs by looking at the total number of teaching hours required. So I want to zoom back out and return to this concept of the people strategy. In her introduction to the book Putting Staff First, Professor Sam Twistleton says, and I quote, We all know that education is the foundation of a civilized society and the single most important way to open doors and transform lives. Without teachers, we wouldn't have brain surgeons and Nobel Prize winners. We wouldn't have well-adjusted people who create cohesive communities and make the world a better place. We need high-quality teaching more than ever before. So we really do need to understand that our schools, our trust, is just our people. And we need to do this with conviction and enthusiasm. John Tomsett and Johnny Utterly, in their book, Putting Staff First, talk about the concept of hypoxic adults. So those who have not put on their own oxygen masks first when the cabin depressurizes, and therefore end up with blurred vision, flashes, euphoria, numbness, apprehension, dizziness. The authors make a direct parallel with schools. So we actually want the opposite of this. We want to make our schools and our trusts great places to work. My friend and colleague, Mandy Coulter, author of the book Talent Architects, asks the question, why should you make your school, or indeed in our case, your trust, a great place to work? She talks about HR and education being hopelessly behind other sectors. She also makes the point that the wider context of the world of work is changing. So the crisis we face with recruitment and retention in education is not a short-term challenge. So we know there's been a bit of a spike in interest in teaching and recruitment to initial teacher training, but this is unlikely to be a steady trend beyond the global pandemic. So what are the other trends in work outside of education that we need to think about? People will most likely work into their 70s and 80s. Life will be multi-staged. Transitions will become the norm. Now, this is in the longer term, but our sector is not immune to these changes. Attitudes to work are changing among younger people, with so-called millennials wanting different patterns of work and expecting different things from employers. So Mandy poses some really important questions for schools and trusts as employers. Does my trust have a clear people strategy and a clear plan for implementation? Have we set out our vision for the kind of employer we want to be? And do we have a plan to get there? Do we really know the full costs of our current people management approach, both in terms of finances and in terms of education impact? And are these issues right at the top of our agenda so that the executive team, the heads in our trust, can really consider this? In Mandy's article for CST's Trust Journal, she talks about the 4 pillars of making your trust a great place to work. So firstly, leadership, culture, and climate. Secondly, developing your people and talent. Thirdly, focusing on pupil behavior. And fourthly, actively managing workload and well-being. She says the most crucial of the 4 pillars is, unsurprisingly, leadership, culture, and climate. It underpins all of the others. It is often said that people leave a boss, not an employer, and surveys across the economy usually bear this out. So Edurio, another of CST's Platinum partners, recently published a report finding that leadership dynamics was the biggest factor impacting on retention in schools. But manageable workload and staff well-being have rightly shot up the agenda in recent years. The NFER research shows that teachers work on average a 50-hour week, more hours than nurses or police officers, even accounting for the school holiday. We work intensely over periods of long hours, and this is linked to ill health and stress. At the same time, we have to accept that the school term is intense. So whilst attempts to reduce the workload itself is very important, we need to go beyond that and create a culture of well-being so that staff feel valued, they feel cared about, and they feel able to cope with the pressures at key work times. There are some common areas that I've seen in schools and trusts who've addressed these issues with real impact. So, for example, introducing verbal marking and feedback, reviewing homework policy and practice, looking at centralized behavior management systems, and crucially, perhaps providing resilience training to staff, particularly to those early career teachers, those teachers who are just starting out in the profession, because we know too many of them leave in the first 5 years. Alongside this, introducing flexible working is crucial. This not only contributes to well-being, but also aids recruitment and retention, as well as supporting the career progression of women and those with caring responsibilities. It is not easy in a school environment which has genuine structural barriers, such as timetabling, but a small number of schools are challenging this. And with the cultural will, they are overcoming barriers. So we need a radical shift in this area so that our sector is competing in the modern world of work for the talent that we need to attract into education. So I've said human resources is often low level, reactive and transactional in nature in our sector. While it performs basic functions, these are not going to create the conditions for our school, our trust, to be a great place to work. Many successful commercial, charitable, and public sector businesses have started to address this, and indeed have addressed this some years ago, and have human resources teams at the top table, so really impacting on strategy through a focused approach to our people, to people strategy. All trust boards, in my view, need this input. I have no doubt that as a trust and as an employer, you already recognise this, which is what today's event is all about. The fact of this event means you are thinking deeply about how you can benefit from creating the conditions for greater flexibility for your staff. If your approach to flexible working is located in a wider people strategy and a culture within all the schools in your trust where every child and every adult can flourish, then I have no doubt that you will go from strength to strength. Thank you.